Starting at the North Atlantic coastline, European colonies spread like fire, driven by a religious zeal that empowered these new Americans to overtake the land as a God-given right. Eminent domain was about to impose its influence upon the New World. But the taming of this new land was not an easy task. An endless forest with fierce natives who appeared like spirits out of the wild were there to greet these early settlers. One can only imagine the fear that struck in the hearts of the newcomers as they came across the Native Americans, clad in fur and feathered headdress, war paint scrolled across the face of a fierce and proud people. There was an alliance between American Indians and the French, centered on the Great Lakes region during the French and Indian War beginning in 1754. The alliance was formed between French settlers on one side and a number of regional Indian tribes on the other. It allowed the French and the Indians to form a safe haven in the Middle Ohio Valley. The main motivating factor for the Indian tribes in this relationship was a call to join forces to drive the British out of the land. French and Indian troops were combined in offensives against the British. By 1759, the British forces were gaining momentum and defeated the French at the Battle of Fort Niagara. As the struggle continued, it found the French in a position where they could no longer supply and support their Indian allies. With this development, the Franco-Indian alliance started to unravel. This set the stage for the British to negotiate a new relationship of support and supplies for the Indians. A turn in the tide of the relationship between the Indian tribes and the British found a new focus in joining forces against the advancing American colonists. For the Indians, the wilds of northern Ohio were fertile hunting grounds. From hunting forays over the years, a trail had been etched into the landscape between Tuscarawas and Lake Erie. This trail eventually made for convenient passage between the traditional hunting grounds and trading points. To add to the tensions between the Americans and the British Royal Navy was involved in the practice of impressment, the act of removing seamen from American merchant vessels and forcing them to serve on behalf of the Royal Navy. By 1812, hostilities between the British and the Americans boiled over into an act of war. A man named Martin Smith was given an allotment of land in Ohio's Western Reserve as reward for his service in the Revolutionary War. In 1798, Smith followed the old Indian trail to his land, widening the path as he went. This trail became the road that General Elijah Wadsworth would eventually turn into a military highway to supply the troops at Camp Avery in Milan during the War of 1812. This road was called Smith Road. This was the first developed road in Medina. It became the matrix that the community would be built on.
Smith Road was built to supply those forts, mainly supply them from the Fort Duquesne or Pittsburgh area, and it was the main road through Medina, and Medina was built around it, and the original mill and so forth, allotments were built around that road.
Medina's very first resident was named Austin Badger. He came from New York State. He was born in 1793, and he was actually a veteran of the War of 1812. He was present at the village of Buffalo when the British burned it down. And a few years after that, he packed all his belongings in a knapsack, took a boat from Buffalo to Cleveland, and then walked all the way from Cleveland to what will become eventually Medina County. He was hired by Rufus Ferris, who was Elijah Boardman's land agent, to be a surveyor. But before he could start surveying anything, he was hired to create a public square. So he took his axe and he chopped down 2.5 acres to make a public square. After he did that, he built the very first house in Medina, the very first residence. It was a log cabin. It's located on the site where Cool Beans stands now. And it was not just an ordinary log cabin, it was 2-story. First story was his residence, a hotel, and of course a tavern. And then the second story was the courthouse. Such was life in early Medina. In 1820, he recalled a really rip-roaring 4th of July celebration. The 4th of July had come, and it was resolved that it should be celebrated with appropriate honors. In the morning, a long pole was cut and stuck in a hollow beech stump where the old courthouse now stands. And on its top streamed gloriously a bandana handkerchief, being the best facsimile of the nation's flag that could be found. Good whiskey, being one of the necessary articles on such a day, was bountifully furnished and plentifully drunk as a beverage. We, on that day, gave names to all the streets and main roads that centered on the village, by which names they are still called.
And they made their toast, and they drank their punch, and they became very mellow. So we have friendship. We have, of course, you have Washington and Jefferson, but you have harmony and all these pleasant names by these people who were in a very good mood at the time.
While the 4th of July party was sufficiently supplied, the future would take more serious consideration. Roads and trails were primitive, and Medina residents were dependent on supplies that could only be obtained by days of rough riding on horseback or wagon. Early Medina residents kept their food stores stocked by hunting deer, bear, and turkey. But supplies like corn, rye, and wheat were not so easily obtained. Even when these supplies were in hand, it was a challenge to turn it into meal and flour. Sometimes they would put corn into a leather bag and pound it with the blunt end of an axe. Wheat and rye had to be shelled by hand. Tools, nails, and mechanical repairs took long journeys, and as the community started to build in numbers, business was needed to make these necessities of life available.
There was water here, there was fresh water, a stream, which was used to build a mill because it took flowing fresh water to find water enough to build a mill. And the mill was built right on Smith Road. And the first town started there. And until they donated the land for the park land and for the courthouse, that's where the center of the town was. It was pretty obvious if you look at the old plats that's where the center of town was centered there. It crossed north-south. The pike, they built the Worcester Pike, which is now Route 3, going to Seville and on to Worcester, was routed from Cleveland, was a stagecoach route south through it. So the convergence of traffic east and west and north and south was certainly a logical place to build.
Medina became a crossroads. Soon, the stagecoach would become an important part of our development. Prior to this point, people had to go to Cleveland to send and receive mail. stagecoaches became the delivery service for the government mail contracts, a service that allowed a newfound luxury and convenience to the citizens. As businesses grew along the stagecoach routes, coachmen not only carried letters and packages, they also carried money and were asked to deliver messages to customers or even sometimes transact business on the sender's behalf. Passenger travel by stagecoach was mostly an offshoot of government mail contracts. Without the money from these government contracts, stagecoaches would not have been able to afford to operate as a method of personal transportation. Stagecoach stops became a center of activity. The opportunity presented inspired businessmen to turn these crude stops into fine hotels, restaurants, and taverns. The stagecoach office was in the American Hotel, located on the northwest corner of Medina Square. People passing through on the stagecoach could find lodging, a meal, and a tavern to quench one's thirst after a long ride on the dusty road. This became a way for traveling salesmen to hawk their wares. Some represented companies with intentions of having local stores carry their product lines, and others sold their products right out of the trunks that were toted from town to town. This was an important step in the development of the distribution of products. As this method of bringing new goods to the community evolved, salesmen started to advertise the dates and times when they would be in town in the local newspapers. The stagecoaches brought a wide range of characters, some of them snake oil salesmen, selling elixirs with lofty claims of miracle cures for just about any problem. Due to the transient nature of these salesmen, by the time the customer realized that the secret elixir contained ingredients like watered-down rot-gut whiskey, the shady salesman was long gone and repeating his scam to the next town full of victims. There were also doctors who would use the American Hotel as a place to give talks about medical issues, then would see patients in the hotel room, and at the conclusion of their examination, consult on the treatment. A treatment that always just happened to be the very elixir that he was selling. What a fortunate coincidence for all involved.
Certainly back in the early 1800s, even before traditional medicine came on board, there were a lot of the herbal medications and homeopathic type medications that certainly are used to some degree and now, but were found that there were better things now, thank goodness. Otherwise, we'd be having people still dying in their 30s and 40s from pneumonia. We wouldn't be diagnosing cardiac disease and rheumatic fever and kidney disease and those sort of things, which impact so many people. And people were dying, life expectancy back in the 1800s was only about 35, 40, 42 years old. And it wasn't just because of the six-shooters being pulled in arguments, okay, it was from a lot of communicable diseases, dysentery, pneumonias, etc. So.
In the book titled History of Medina County and Ohio, published in 1881, this account is given. The earliest mention of medical administration in Medina County is of Aunt Chloe, wife of Judge Brown, of Wadsworth in 1816, she having a small chest of remedies which, it is said, were of great value to the early pioneers. When any of them were taken sick, Aunt Chloe would be sent for and would deal out such remedies as her ripened judgment might direct. She perhaps was the first practitioner of the county. It is said that Eve in the Garden of Eden, through transgression, entailed upon posterity the seeds of disease and death. and all of our woe. But Aunt Chloe in the wilderness of America, with sympathetic heart and extended hand, afforded relief to many a suffering mortal.
Well, all you had was your big black bag. In that big black bag, you'd have little bottles, little vials of different things. You might have some aspirin, you might have some liniment, you might have some morphine-type products for pain. I think it was Landanum, I think, is what one of the things that they used in Lewis and Clark expedition for when folks would get injured in their expeditions up the river to the West Coast, you know. So that, you were extremely limited in what you could do. It was really, for the most part, supportive care, and that was it.
In another account from the history of Medina County in Ohio, Dr. Bella B. Clark came to Medina County with his father in April 1818 from Waterbury, Connecticut, and commenced the practice of medicine immediately at Medina Village. The first call on record for him professionally was to the victims of that famous first session of the Court of Common Pleas at the barn of Squire Ferris, who had so fondly imbibed of the good old-fashioned whiskey, as the settlers called it. Dr. Clark, it is said, prescribed homeopathically, that is, the hair of the dog to cure the bite. Dr. Clark rode a little pony, a hardy and courageous little fellow as ever was known. But one night as the doctor was riding homeward along the bridle path through the woods, a fearful scream of a wild animal burst upon his ears, and the pony, with instinctive fear, started at breakneck speed, to the doctor's great satisfaction. For the animal, supposed to have been a panther, came bounding after, its screams making the night air hideous, and filling horse and rider with alarm. But alas for both of them, a treetop had fallen into the path, and into this plunged horse and rider pell-mell into confusion and darkness. And then one unearthly yell from the doctor's throat broke in upon that tragic scene. It penetrated the deep recesses of the forest shade. It reverberated from earth to cloud, and as it died away in the distance, a painful silence ensued, broken only by the night bird's plaintive song. That panther never got there, and the doctor leisurely gathered himself up, extricated the horse, and picking up his pill bag, remounted and jogged homeward.
Medina was part of the growing part of the Western Reserve at the time, and the part that was being populated and being in the growth pattern. The great factor at the time was the Erie Canal, which in the 1830s and so forth really was the big factor in developing the agricultural part of this northern part of Ohio, and especially the northeast part, because you could ship corn and wheat all the way to New York fast and cheap, and it did. And some of these cities, like Milan, Ohio, became great wheat shipping ports. It was a huge factor, and it was also the factor which brought some of the immigrants here. My German immigrants of my mother's forebears came to Valley City in Brunswick era from Canada, from England, from Germany, but they came because the canal had brought the business, and all of a sudden the land prices were going up, and farm goods the price on farm goods was going up, and it brought a great many people down from Canada, and that was all a part, of course, of the end of the War of 1812, the Great Division between Canada and the United States.
As the population of Medina grew, So did the need for more convenient methods of obtaining clothing, medicines, farm implements, dried goods, and services. One by one, a community of businesses arose to meet the challenges and necessities of everyday life. Roads sprung up from country farms connecting to the main roads that led into the center of town. The feeling of isolation experienced by Medina's early settlers was beginning to be overcome by the development of roads, businesses, and places of worship. These assets not only helped Medina from an economic perspective, but also helped to connect the citizens of Medina to a greater sense of community.
The merchants in town sold the basics. I don't think that there was the glamorous boutiques, etc. It was what you needed. There was the blacksmith, who of course shod your horse and took care of that. You had wagon makers. You had wheelwrights who made the wheels and did the repairs, as did the wagon makers. And then you had the harness makers and the saddle makers. At the top of the hill, the town hill as they call it, in the location where we now go for frozen yogurt, there was the King and Gun store, and they specialized in food products. They sold pork and meats, etc., and gunpowder and liquor. So what else would you need? I mean, David King, he was an extremely notable, accomplished man. Actually, he was not a rough frontier type. He was from Connecticut. He was one of the investors in the Connecticut Land Company. So he had quite a bit of land out here. His home, which he built in the 1830s, sat on the present site of the library. Because he was a prosperous man even before he came to the county, he had the means of building a private home that was like none other in the village of Medina nor in the county. The David King house sat on the present site of the library, right on the square. And it is familiar to most people today as the beautiful, expansive Greek Revival house that sits on the corner of Union Street and North Broadway. It is a very impressive home today. So you can imagine how impressive it was in the 1830s and 1840s when the majority of the people were still in their drafty log cabins. And even the square had nothing to compare. He made a mark visibly and economically in the early days of the village.
One major step in moving Medina forward was the publishing of Medina's first newspapers. This connected the people with the community and with the wider world. This was an opportunity that didn't escape the attention of the local businessmen. In these periodicals, new establishments were announced with a list of goods and services that could be delivered. Flowery language and incredible claims were touted in hopes of attracting customers. The first newspaper published in Medina Village was the Free Press and Medina County Advertiser, a Democratic and anti-Masonic journal established in 1832 by Joseph W. White. The anti-Masonic movement has its roots in the story of the disappearance of William Morgan of Batavia, New York. Morgan, an ex-Mason, threatened to expose Freemasonry secrets by publishing rituals and confidential information. Morgan suddenly disappeared, and claims were made that he was kidnapped by the Freemasons. Outraged citizens formed protest against Freemasonry. This manifested into a political movement, also known as anti-Jacksonist movement, aimed at Andrew Jackson, a member of the Freemasons. This became the Anti-Masonic Party. They considered the Masons to be an exclusive organization, taking unfair advantage of common folk and violating the essential principles of democracy. The Anti-Masonic Party ran presidential candidates in 1828 and 1832, but by 1835 lost its momentum and eventually dissolved into obscurity. Joseph White printed the Free Press on Tuesday morning at his shop on Court Street. The fees were $2 per year if paid in advance, and $2.50 if paid at the end of the years. In his terms, he mentions that most kinds of produce will be taken if delivered at market price. The Free Press did not meet with any degree of success, and the Whig sentiment in Medina grew, notwithstanding the presence of this Democratic journal. The final blow came when a fire destroyed the office in 1837, and the newspaper never revived. In 1835, a young man from New York came to town with pronounced anti-slavery views and a dedication towards the Whig political philosophies. He established a periodical called the Constitutionalist. This newspaper became a legitimate power in the county and did much to inspire support for the Whig Party. Carpenter was so successful in the county that Medina ended up losing him to the world of politics when he was elected as a representative in 1839. The opinions and political leanings of the Constitutionalist had a rival in a newspaper called the Watchtower. This was the first newspaper that gave voice to the Democratic views within the county, ready to stand in opposition to almost anything that the Whig Party stood for. This was established by H. Canfield in 1838. These newspapers squared off over the presidential election in 1840 between William H. Harrison of the Whig Party and Martin Van Buren, representing the Democrats. The background on this rivalry began with the first election between Van Buren and Harrison. Here's what the Constitutionalists had to say about differences between the two men. Van Buren has been rubbed till there is nothing left but the glittering and the show. Such observations as these are necessary because a serious and concealed attempt is made by the office holders to delude the American people with the idea that under the plain Republican garb and in the unassuming and unostentatious manner of the farmer of North Bend, there is nothing but a weak, imbecile old man. But we digress. General Harrison reached the American House, where he lodges about 5 o'clock. Then he ascended the steps of the hotel and addressed the multitude. But a voice could as readily be heard in the mid-ocean in the storm as in such a crowd as there was there. They who were within earshot at the close lifted up their hats, and the crowd sent forth 6 thundering cheers of applause. The band struck up "See the Conquering Hero Comes" and "Yankee Doodle." It was interesting to hear the remarks of the hundreds and hundreds of lookers-on. There he is, some cried out as he came in sight. "He is a tough one," cried another. "He looks like a piece of oak bark." You can't hurt such a man as he. You could not drive a bullet through his skin. Devil, I thought, he was a great stout chap. I saw little Martin in Broadway the other day with President Dewar. He was such a slick little fellow. He looked as if he had just come out of the upper drawer. I should be afraid to touch him, lost it would rumple him up. But old Tippecanoe here is as plain as you please. As the third consecutive election victory for the Democrats, it set the stage for the incumbent Vice President Martin Van Buren to take his seat as president in the White House. Van Buren's victory was evidence of a failed strategy by the Whigs when they decided to run 4 candidates against Martin Van Buren. The thinking was that these 4 candidates each had enough of a stronghold in their respective regions to defeat Van Buren. But this plan backfired when it divided the votes between the 4 Whigs, leaving Van Buren alone to collect all of the Democratic votes. As a lesson learned by the Whig Party, it threw all of its weight behind one candidate in 1840, and that man was William H. Harrison. The United States was going through a period of great economic depression in 1840, and this was the backdrop that set the stage for the incumbent president Martin Van Buren to square off with war hero William H. Harrison, rallying under the famous slogan, "Tippecanoe and Tyler too."